So we're going back to our roots for today's episode to talk about policing again. And I'm sure you all heard about the $1 million increase that the Edmonton Police got to their budget recently. So it's a really good opportunity for us to talk about why police keep getting money, but also why this is tied to, I think, a general lack of accountability when it comes to police in Edmonton and Alberta largely. We'll be interviewing Rob Huell today, who's a community member who's been a part of various police advisory committees and councils. He's been a part of Indigenous councils and advisory committees with police, as well as the recent Community Safety and Wellbeing Task Force that was put together by the City of Edmonton. And Rob is really critical of policing and how it's been conducted in Edmonton, and I think raises a lot of very important points, and mainly a point around the fact that despite their performance, whether they perform very well, whether they perform very poorly, the arguments around police funding stay the same. It's always more money every year. So in 2000, at the start of the last 2 decades, we saw the budget sitting at $106 million. And City Council had the Edmonton Police come back to Council every year to essentially ask for whatever money they needed. And it was relatively routine for Council to deny requests by the Edmonton Police for things like extra money to operate their helicopter that they received, or to hire extra officers. So for example, even before 2000, in 1991, Police Chief Doug McNally fought to add 11 officers, but was left with a budget of $76 million and the ability to add just 1 officer. So I think now we see a conversation that's relatively polarized, where I think people rightfully think that police have always gotten what they wanted. But I think there has still been limits that were placed. And even going back more recently to 2014, Council identified pretty clearly that giving police everything that they asked for was a problem. So former Mayor Don Iveson pointed out in budget talks in 2014, when City Council was debating that the police budget has gone up by 112% in the last 12 years. And the approach for decreasing police funding was to essentially ask for other levels of government to pitch in, so federal and provincial money to come in, and also to create the funding formula that we currently see today that will provide predictable funding, and I think back then they thought would eventually lead to a decrease in funding to police. So that didn't necessarily happen, but I also think it's really interesting to see how none of the arguments that were made when kind of confronted by the fact that police continue to get increased funding, none of the arguments included to just not increase the funding. I think a lot of the arguments were, we have to keep giving them more money. We just have to change how we keep giving them more money. So budget levels continue to increase, except for in 2015. So in 2016, we saw $306 million. In 2017, we saw $322 million. When the funding formula was implemented in 2018, it was $335 million. Before I go any further, I think it's important to point out that these numbers include a margin of error of around 3 to 4 armored trucks, or $3 to $4 million, because it depends on what source you go to for police budget numbers, whether it's the PDF from the police or media sources. But we continued to see increases until George Floyd happened, as people like to say, in 2020, when money was diverted from the budget, but increases still kept happening. And I think it's also important to point out in 2014-15, when budget conversations were happening, there was even talks about moving money towards what was called back then preventative crime initiatives. So community organizations like Reach Edmonton thought that their crisis line program fit the bill, and they're asking the city for $500,000 And I think it's interesting to look at that ask versus what we're seeing now, which is $11 million being divided into different streams, and then $1 million this year. So pretty dramatic increase over 5 years, I think. But also, I think it shows this lowball almost of the amount that should have been in place years ago, now actually seeing an acceleration in that number, given the fact that we're seeing a lot more public pressure and I guess even basic acknowledgements that the current system we have now is clearly not working. So at the same time, police are changing their strategy, I think, and becoming really clever in their ability to adapt to the social conversation around policing by creating more social services and trying to adapt and act as social workers in order to hold on to funding or create a situation where social work is done under their umbrella. So like I said before, funding can be continued instead of going to actual social agencies and actual social workers. So all of this is happening under the context of what I believe is a clear lack of accountability when it comes to not only how much power we've given to police, how much authority, but also I think, like I said, a blank check and continuation of the status quo by media and by the government as well. So need for police is going down. The Crime Severity Index has been trending downwards for decades, despite occasional increases. We're seeing a downward trend. And I think we're also seeing incredible harm being done to communities by policing. Indigenous communities, Black communities in Edmonton have seen decades, basically a century, if not more, of police violence, police harassment. So that I think should be enough to justify not only larger accountability, but seriously questioning the system that we currently have in place. A case that I want to talk about that I think exemplifies a lot of the issues that we're talking about is a story that was reported a few weeks ago about a victim of sexual assault in Edmonton who reported her crime to the Edmonton Police and was met with a lot of myths around rape, such as the police telling her that the experience that she had was consensual when it wasn't, and that she regretted that, and also diminishing and dismissing what happened to her. So the victim complained about the way she was treated, and Chief Dale McPhee dismissed the complaint against the officer and claimed that there was no wrongdoing in the situation because the officer deemed that they were in the right in that situation. The victim went on to appeal this case to the Alberta Law Enforcement Review Board, and that appeal was further dismissed. So after that, the victim of this crime also went on to apply for this potential money that's given out to victims in Alberta called Victims of Crime Benefit, and was also denied for that. And this is kind of a repeated pattern, I'd say, that essentially ended with an appeal by the victim's lawyer of that previous decision, only to end up with $10,000, which only covered the victim's legal fees. So didn't even go into any other damages or any other expenses that this person had to endure, essentially just to have like a basic amount of justice after having such a traumatic thing happen to them. And this entire mechanism to actually give victims money, called the Alberta Victims of Crime Financial Benefit Program, and the Criminal Injuries Review Board, was actually disbanded recently too. So it doesn't even exist anymore. But I think this case is a really good example of, like I said before, a lot of the issues that we're talking about today, and the things that show that not only police are unaccountable, but that they get to decide the rules that govern themselves. And these are things that we're going to talk about today, and this case is a really good example of these issues.